In the grand halls of Illantia, the Elven King Faylar strode with measured steps, his tall frame casting long shadows in the soft torchlight. He had just returned from the kingdom of Galendria, where negotiations with the dwarf king Durin had been difficult but fruitful. The weight of the conversation still weighed heavily on him, though he carried himself with the bearing of a ruler whose plans were steadily being realized. As he entered the grand hall, its pillars carved with intricate elven runes and vines of silver that seemed to pulse with ancient magic, he was greeted by the soft voice of Queen Iloria, his wife and confidant. She stood at the entrance, her elegant form draped in pale green silks that shimmered like the light of the moon filtering through the trees of Illantia.
"It is good to see you again,"
she said, her voice as melodious as the songbirds that flitted through the royal gardens. Faylar nodded slightly, his keen gaze softening as he met hers.
"It is good to be home. The negotiations were difficult, but Durin is with us. His loyalty to the crown remains unwavering."
Iloria's smile widened.
"That is indeed gratifying to hear,"
she replied, stepping closer to her husband. But then, tilting her head slightly, she added,
"There is something you should know. We have a visitor, one of rather unusual importance."
Faylar frowned in surprise.
"A guest?"
Iloria reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small ornate ring, the design of which Faylar recognized unmistakably. The king's eyes widened slightly as he recognized the symbol etched into the metal, his father's.
"She arrived earlier today.
Iloria explained.
We thought it prudent to detain her at first, but then decided it would be best to escort her to the guest chamber in the far wing of the castle."
Faylar's lips curved into a knowing smile.
"I see. I think I know who you mean. Come,"
he said, motioning for his queen to follow him as they made their way through the winding corridors of the castle. They came to a large door, elaborately decorated with elven symbols flanked by 2 elven guards, their hands on the hilts of their ceremonial swords. Faylar knocked softly on the door, and a measured yet feminine voice came from within.
"You may enter."
The heavy door creaked open, revealing a guest room that was surprisingly elegant and serene. The room was bathed in a soft glow of golden light streaming through the tall arched windows. The walls were decorated with exquisite elven tapestries depicting scenes of nature, forests, rivers, and mythical creatures, and the scent of fresh jasmine hung in the air. The furniture was carved from ancient wood, its craftsmanship impeccable, and the entire room exuded a sense of grace, balance, and calm. A figure of striking beauty and poise stood in the center of the room, a dark elven noblewoman, her dark lavender skin shining in the sun. She wore a dark traveling cloak that fell gracefully around her shoulders, and beneath it, in glimpses of light, was finely forged steel armor that hinted at her readiness for both diplomacy and battle. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, regarded the king and queen with an intensity that belied her calm demeanor.
"Your Grace Valindra,"
Faylar said with a polite bow and pressed the ring into her hand.
"I am pleased that you responded to my message.
He gestured to Iloria.
Please allow me to introduce my wife, Queen Iloria."
Valindra nodded gracefully, her gaze lingering on Iloria with the quiet observation of one who absorbs every detail, but offers little in return. Iloria, ever curious, stepped forward.
"It is a pleasure to meet you, Lady Valindra,"
she said, her voice quiet but inquisitive.
"May I ask how you and my husband know each other?"
Faylar smiled faintly, sensing the subtle tension in the air.
"My father spoke of Valindra often,"
he said, his tone tinged with nostalgia.
He admired her, though circumstances, difficult ones, took them apart.
Valindra turned toward the tall windows, her gaze distant, as if long-buried memories were surfacing.
Those were difficult times,
she said, her voice heavy with old sorrows.
There was a war, and our union was impossible. The nobility would not accept him, and the risk of rebellion was too great. So we kept our relationship secret.
Her fingers touched the ring in her hand, a relic of the past.
Your father gave me this,
she said quietly, holding up the ring that Faylar recognized.
So that I could always contact him if the need arose. But alas, he is no longer with us.
For a moment, a heavy silence filled the room, memories of the past intertwined with the present. Then Faylar cleared his throat, his voice taking on a more pragmatic tone.
My father spoke highly of you, Valindra,
he said, his sharp eyes studying her.
He told me that if I ever had trouble with the kingdom of Alaris, I could count on your help. Is that true?
Valindra turned from the window to meet his gaze, her expression unreadable.
I owe your father my life,
she said quietly.
And in his memory, I will help you. But don't expect much. Alaris is like a volcano. It can explode at any moment.
Faylar nodded thoughtfully.
Even a small advantage could turn the tide in our favor.
At this point, Queen Illantia rose from her seat, sensing the conversation was about to take a more strategic turn.
I still have matters to attend to,
she said gracefully, offering a polite smile to their guest.
But I am glad to have met you, Lady Valindra. I hope we will see more of each other.
Valindra inclined her head.
The pleasure was mine, Your Majesty.
With a final nod, Illantia left the room, leaving Faylar and Valindra alone. The king turned to the dark elf with a calculating gaze.
Now that we are alone,
he said, his voice lowering.
Alaris, what is going on there now, and what do you know about the queen?
In the grand hall of Faylar's castle, after Queen Illantia had gracefully taken her leave, the air grew heavier, laden with the weight of secrets and war. King Faylar remained seated, his hands clasped before him as he turned his sharp gaze back to the dark elf noblewoman Valindra, who stood by the window, the twilight casting faint shadows across her figure. The tension between them was palpable, like a thread drawn tight, as if the fate of their kingdoms rested on the edge of a blade. Valindra's eyes glimmered with intelligence, her voice soft yet edged with the urgency of the news she carried.
Captain Varath and Queen Naerwen have begun preparations for war,
she said, her words measured as though weighing each syllable.
All of Alaris is now trembling with fear. The nobility dares not whisper a word against Naerwen's rule. For those who do, Varath's personal guard swiftly takes care of them.
Faylar's expression remained calm, though a storm of thoughts brewed behind his cool, calculating demeanor. His fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair, the only sign of the thoughts racing through his mind.
And that is not all,
she continued.
The forests of Alaris are now crawling with Ungoliants, monstrous spiders, ravenous and bloodthirsty. They are being used as weapons, no doubt, to terrify those who would oppose Naerwen's reign. They await only a command to attack, and the elves are too frightened to resist.
At this, Faylar's gaze sharpened and a shadow passed over his face.
So,
he muttered, more to himself than to Valindra.
My fears were not misplaced. Naerwen is indeed preparing for war.
Valindra stepped forward, her movements graceful yet deliberate, her violet eyes studying the Elven King.
But it appears, Your Grace, that you have not been idle either,
she remarked with a faint smile, a hint of approval in her voice.
I see the signs. You too have been preparing for what is to come.
King's lips curled into a smile, though it was a smile without warmth.
"You have a keen eye, Lady Valindra,"
he said, his tone acknowledging her perceptiveness.
"It comes with the profession, does it not?"
The dark elf chuckled softly.
Indeed, Your Grace. One learns to see what others miss.
Faylar rose from his chair and walked slowly to the window where Valindra stood, the view of his vast kingdom stretching out before them, bathed in the fading light of the setting sun. His voice was low, filled with the weight of unspoken plans.
"I need complete information, Valindra. Every move that Naerwen makes must be known to me, every whisper in her court, every gathering of her forces, especially what she is planning next. But,"
he added, turning to face her with an intensity that left no room for misunderstanding,
"I don't want you to take unnecessary risks. Stay in the shadows. That is where you are most valuable."
Valindra's expression remained composed, though her eyes sparkled with a quiet confidence.
You need not worry, Your Grace. I know how to remain unseen. The shadows are where I feel most at home.
Faylar inclined his head, a gesture of trust.
"I thank you for the information you have brought me today. It confirms much of what I feared, but it also gives me the knowledge I need to counter Naerwen's moves."
The dark elf noblewoman offered a small bow in response.
I am in your service, King Faylar. Your father's memory still holds a place in my heart. Consider this part of my repayment.
Faylar's voice softened slightly, a rare note of gratitude creeping into his tone.
"Rest now. You will be taken out of the castle through the secret passage when night falls. A horse will be waiting for you there."
Valindra nodded, her expression unreadable as always.
Thank you, Your Grace. I shall take my leave when the time is right.
Faylar glanced at her one last time, his gaze lingering for a moment as though measuring the weight of the alliance they had forged.
"I am glad we had this meeting, Lady Valindra,"
he said, his voice quiet but firm.
"Much may depend on it in the days to come."
With that, Faylar turned and left the room, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a soft creak. Valindra remained by the window for a moment longer, her eyes scanning the horizon, where the sun had almost fully set. The shadows lengthened, creeping across the floor as though welcoming her back into their embrace. The dark portal swirled with violet and shadowed energies as Queen Naerwen stepped through, her senses immediately assaulted by the scent of damp stone and ancient earth. She found herself in the dungeons of Catrak, the ancient and majestic kingdom of trolls and orcs, a place where time itself seemed to have etched its weight into every brick and pillar. The dungeon halls were vast, their walls lined with rough-hewn stone, illuminated by flickering torchlight that barely held back the creeping darkness. Above, high ceilings vanished into shadow, supported by pillars carved with the savage, primal artistry of the trolls, grimacing faces and snarling beasts twisted from stone. Before Naerwen could take in her surroundings fully, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the cavernous hall. A group of trolls, their hulking forms towering over her, came charging forward, their guttural voices raised in battle cries.
"Attack!"
One of them roared, brandishing a crude but deadly club, the others following suit with weapons raised. With a sharp whispered incantation, Naerwen's hands glowed briefly with arcane energy, and with a swift motion she released her spell. The air around her shimmered as an unseen force slammed into the trolls, hurling them against the stone walls with a bone-cracking impact. The dungeon fell silent for a moment, the only sound being the groans of the downed trolls. But her spell had stirred the hornet's nest. From the deeper recesses of Catrak, more trolls and orcs, wild-eyed and ready for battle, poured forth, armed with spears, axes, and bows. Arrows whistled through the air toward her, and several spears were hurled in her direction. Naerwen, her heart racing, quickly chanted another spell. A shield of light erupted around her, a barrier of shimmering magic that blazed so brightly it blinded her attackers. The creatures reeled, stumbling and cursing, their vision seared by the light.
Enough.
A voice boomed through the hall, deep and commanding. A single orc, larger and more scarred than the others, pushed through the crowd, his eyes narrowed as he withstood the radiant glow with difficulty. He was clearly a leader of some sort, his skin marked with the symbols of rank, his broad chest heaving as he growled.
Who are you, and what business do you have here?
Lowering her shield and feeling the drain of the magic course through her, struggled to steady her breath.
I am Queen Naerwen,
she announced, her voice firm despite her exhaustion.
I have come to speak with King Malgrim and my sister, Talira.
The orc leader eyed her warily for a moment before nodding.
Follow me, but tread carefully, outsider. These halls are not kind to those who enter uninvited.
Naerwen followed the orc through the massive dungeon corridors, their path lit by the eerie green glow of moss that clung to the walls. The architecture grew more grandiose as they walked, transitioning from rough stone to intricately carved columns that supported high arched ceilings. The columns were adorned with carvings of battle scenes, trolls and orcs locked in eternal combat with their enemies. Massive braziers flickered with a strange, bluish flame, casting shadows that danced across the floor like restless spirits. At last they reached an enormous set of iron-bound doors, their surface engraved with the snarling visage of a troll king. The orc leader turned to Naerwen.
Wait here.
He said gruffly, then strode forward to speak with the two guards standing at attention. After a brief exchange, the doors creaked open, and the orc leader returned to her side.
You may enter.
Naerwen stepped through the doors into a grand hall, a stark contrast to the dim and oppressive dungeons. This chamber was lavish by troll standards. The floor was covered in thick animal hides, and the walls were hung with banners bearing the symbols of the kingdom of Catrak. At the center of the room sat King Malgrim, the hulking orc warlord who ruled over the troll and orc domains. Malgrim was a fearsome sight, his muscular frame draped in furs and heavy armor, a jagged iron crown resting atop his brow. His skin was a deep, mottled green, and his eyes glowed with a cunning intelligence beneath a heavy brow. Scars lined his face and arms, each a testament to his prowess in battle. A massive warhammer leaned against his throne, its head caked with dried blood and bits of bone. At his side, seated on a smaller, elegant throne, was Talira, Naerwen's estranged sister. Talira was as different from the brutish orcs as night was from day. A dark-skinned elf of striking beauty, she wore flowing robes of midnight blue edged with silver. Her armor, though light, was finely crafted, a blend of elegance and lethality. Her long, light hair was braided intricately, and her violet eyes were sharp as they fell upon her sister. Naerwen stepped forward, her blue cloak swirling around her like living shadows, her voice dripping with sarcasm.
I see you have found time to feast,
she remarked, casting a disdainful glance at the table laden with food.
Forgive me for interrupting such an important event, but I was passing and thought I would drop in and perhaps suggest a very advantageous alliance.
A wry smile curved the corners of her lips, but her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, remained fixed on her sister, Talira. Talira narrowed her eyes from where she sat next to the massive figure of King Malgrim.
We have no need of any alliance with you, Naerwen,
she said sharply, her voice hard. Years of resentment between them, long buried beneath layers of bitterness, bubbled to the surface like smoldering embers. Naerwen gave a low, mocking laugh.
Ah, I see. You are still angry that I banished you from Alaris. I admit, I was harsh and quick in my judgment in my youth. Perhaps I was rash.
Rash?
Talira blurted, her voice laced with venom.
You banished me. You robbed me of everything I had. And now you think you have changed?
Her eyes flashed with rage.
Are you different now, sister?
Yes,
Naerwen replied coldly.
that is why I am here.
She took a step forward, her tone now caustic.
But I see that feasting and merriment are more important to you than conquest now.
Talira's lips curved into a mocking smile.
You don't command us. You have no right to tell us what we should or should not do.
For a moment, the tension in the room boiled like a cauldron on the verge of spilling. The two sisters stood locked in a battle of wills, their words harsh and riddled with hidden wounds. The air between them crackled, as if the room itself could not bear the weight of their feud. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the thunderous slam of Malgrim's fist on the table. The huge Orc King leapt to his feet, his towering form casting a shadow over the room. His eyes blazed with anger as his deep voice roared.
Enough! I have had enough of this bickering. I want proposals, not your petty squabbles.
He looked at Naerwen, his patience clearly wearing thin. Talira, seeing the storm in Malgrim's voice, fell silent, her eyes gleaming with caution. She knew better than to provoke him when he was angry. Naerwen, sensing the change in power, softened her tone, but her edge remained.
Very well.
She said, her voice level and calculating.
Lord Valor and I are preparing to attack Illantia. The elves are weakening, and the time to strike will soon come. My proposal is simple. You surround Mithrandorn, holding their forces in place while we crush Illantia's resistance and take the city.
Talira sneered, her lips twisting into a sneer.
And what of the dwarves? Have you forgotten them, sister? They will not sit idly by while you besiege Illantia.
Naerwen's expression remained impassive.
I will deal with the dwarves,
She replied.
Their current ruler will fall, and a more pleasant successor will take the throne. Someone who will listen to me.
Malgrim stroked his chin, his sharp fangs glinting in the firelight. He was clearly weighing the offer. After a moment, his deep voice boomed through the hall.
And what do I gain by this alliance, Naerwen? What do I gain by it while you and Valor divide Illantia between yourselves?
A calculating smile flitted across Naerwen's lips.
By joining forces with us, we will take Mithrandorn, and you will claim another crown. When the dust settles, you will rule as the undisputed king of the Westlands, another kingdom in your possession.
King's eyes gleamed with interest, but he was not entirely convinced.
And Valor?
He asked, his voice tinged with suspicion.
What does he gain from all this?
Naerwen's gaze flickered to the Orc King, her voice level.
Valor has his own quarrel with the dwarves. His grudge against them is long and bloody.
Malgrim chuckled, his thoughts clearly racing through his head. Before he could respond, Naerwen continued, her voice now laced with dark amusement.
So, great king of trolls and orcs, will you join us in this conquest? Or will you return to your feast and let others take the spoils of war?
A spark of anger flared in Malgrim's eyes at her provocation. His fists clenched, but after a tense moment, he nodded slowly, deliberately.
We agree to an alliance.
He declared, his voice final. Talira, who had been glaring at Naerwen, opened her mouth to protest, but Malgrim shot her a determined look, his voice booming as he repeated.
We agree.
The room fell silent. Naerwen, feeling victorious, turned to her sister.
Talira, if you wish, you may return to Alaris. Take the throne there. It is yours, should you choose to reclaim it.
She blinked, taken aback by the sudden offer. When she spoke, her voice was thick with disbelief.
You would so easily give me the throne of Alaris, after everything?
Naerwen smiled coldly.
I will take Illantia. Alaris means little to me now.
Talira, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, leaned back in her chair, the weight of the offer weighing on her. This time she found herself unable to speak. Naerwen glanced around the room with satisfaction.
It seems our negotiations have been successful.
She turned to Malgrim.
Ready your armies. Await my signal. When Valor and I march on Illantia, you will surround Mithrandorn.
King Malgrim struck his chest with a battle blow, showing his fierce resolve.
We will be ready.
With a final nod, Naerwen reached into her cloak and pulled out the runes. The air around her shimmered as she whispered the spell. The dark portal swirled behind her, its edges crackling with energy. Then, with a final triumphant smile, she stepped through the portal and vanished, leaving behind only the faintest trace of her magic and the looming promise of war. Thanks for watching. See you in new stories.
Bright are early summer flowers, darker are the trees of May. Deepest night before the twilight leads into a brighter day. Weekend sage and shining garden, nature's best roof overhead. Ever dark and ever brighter, forwards to the days ahead. To time the elven farewell hush is called as they retreat. Victory is only certain after the determined feat. Leaves and sigils spring from branches, prairies breathe through gentle breeze. Only gentle hearts sit anxious underneath the elmwood trees. Suit high in the elven farewell hush is called as they retreat. Suit high in the elven farewell hush is called as they retreat. Leaves and sigils spring from branches, prairies breathe through gentle breeze. Only gentle hearts sit anxious underneath the elmwood trees.
Thanks for watching to the end. See you in new adventures.